Hello everyone, Sage again and welcome to the Executive Corner Expert Talks by 𝐊𝐚𝐥𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐞 TV. Today's guest is Dr. Richard 𝐊𝐴𝐚𝐥𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐞, a Senior Policy Advisor for the New Liberals political party. And working within a democratic preferential voting system, the votes given to the minor parties can have a major impact on the major parties, especially in the Senate. And today's guest will share insights from the newly registered political party, the New Liberals. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Richard 𝐊𝐴𝐚𝐥𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐞, Senior Policy Advisor for the New Liberals, with us today. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you too. And let's get started. The New Liberals aim to base Australia's economic development on policies of incentive, not of subsidy. How does this relate to the New Liberals Party's belief that GDP growth should not be the only metric to base national prosperity on, especially in the times of national deficit that we're currently in, please?
Okay, good question. Bear in mind that this is a new party, so we're formulating policy as we go prior to the election. And I'm not an economist, but in terms of that question, we believe that GDP is actually not a good measure on a number of different counts. And a lot of the policy that we're devising at the moment is really based not on neoclassic economics, but on modern monetary policy. And also part of that is avoiding that trap between governments needing to run surpluses or deficits or whatever it is. There's this belief that the government always has to be in surplus, which is a nonsense. And in times like this, when the economy is being ravaged by the pandemic, governments actually need to spend. It's the only way to incentivize the economy. And so we're looking at various ways we can do that.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. I think when you go to America, you can see the national debt in numbers, and the number is very, very long. But it's very true what you say, that the financial model, the economic system that we work in, doesn't really have to or need a surplus. I mean, the whole thing is based on the Federal Reserve creating debt out of the quantitative easing. So it's a very interesting point that you raised there. How does the New Liberals Party aim to establish a simple and just tax system which guarantees that all persons and all entities will pay their fair share? Will it involve changes to superannuation? We've seen that the US President Joe Biden is making waves with his monetary policy requiring more tax from people earning over $400,000. How will the net or the high net individuals and corporations be impacted?
I think probably considerably. I don't see that we can go on living the way we have. If you look at the socioeconomic stratification that is giving rise to this widening gap between the ultra wealthy and the poor, you begin to realize that every billionaire is a policy mistake. So what we need to do is try and make the tax system more equitable. Part of that is in ensuring that corporations that operate in Australia pay their fair share of tax in Australia. And actually the G7 right at this moment are looking at ways to enforce perhaps something like a 15% tax on corporates in every jurisdiction where there is business done. The other thing we need to do is to make sure that corporates don't shelter behind transfer pricing schemes and such. The other interesting thing I would mention here is that we want to put two things. We want to put more money into the hands of ordinary men and women, not the banks, not the major corporations, but to revitalize the economy through that. And it's not just in America. I mean, you note what's happening in America and Joe Biden's policy in taxing wealthy people. But this is even happening in China now. You know, the reverse philosophy, but it's still something that this reversal of wealth needs to be looked at by all economies everywhere.
Yes, that is interesting, the proliferation of the middle class. It is quite sad that half the world's wealth is held by only 1% of the population. So if something can be done to somehow create more liquidity in the economy, so it's the benefit of all involved, that would be great. Thank you for sharing your insights.
It needs to be more equitable, certainly.
Definitely, yes. And Australia is an interesting country. It's gone from having one of the lowest uptakes of the COVID-19 vaccine to now having one of the highest inoculation rates in a matter of months because possibly of more exposure to active cases. And the federal government is also offering vaccine doses to the neighbouring island nations. The last time a vaccine was mandatory in Australia was for smallpox. And it does seem that the discussed Freedom Plan involves somewhat of a compulsory vaccination. What is the New Liberal Party's view on this, please?
Again, we're in another trap here, and it's the trap between individual agency, which is the right wing of politics, if you like, the right of the individual to have freedom and pursue rights, freedom of expression, and to pursue business. And that philosophy obviously underpins our economy in Australia, as it does in all Western economies. And on the other hand, that need also to connect with people and community. We fall into the trap of yo-yoing between one or the other. It's either the left in power or the right in power. And I think the New Liberals want to try and craft a more artful governance where we look at the data from both sides and try to have a middle ground that is sensible, that doesn't shut down the economy, that allows people to freely express their own individuality and their intelligence in understanding how best to look after their own health and well-being, and at the same time make sure that the community as a whole doesn't suffer. I don't think we're heading towards compulsory vaccination for everybody, but certainly when I started to travel, and I'm old, but when I started to travel, I had to have a vaccination passport for yellow fever and malaria and things like that. That was perfectly common.
True, very true. And thank you for sharing your own experience there. So Australia's government has not yet been able to pledge net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So we're moving on quite quickly from issue to issue, but that's only because of our 10-minute time slot. Solar energy in Australia is booming, and the recent federal budget has allocated a large amount of money to developing renewable energy production partners in order to make the space more cost effective, especially after Australia's black summer fire season last year. How are the New Liberals planning on keeping Australia on track with the global climate change goals, please?
So more investment in renewables, obviously, and solar is the most important of those, bringing the date to 2030 to make sure that we become more ingenious and more imaginative in how we can create investments. There's also the situation developed here. I'm sorry to keep talking about the traps that we're in, but Western governments generally, and governments all around the world, are focused on the reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases. In the long term, that's very, very important indeed, because at the moment we're running at about somewhere between 416 and 420 units of carbon in the air, which is not good at all. We need to do things faster. But we also need to understand that emissions isn't the be-all and end-all of the problem. Global warming is driving us over planetary boundaries such as loss of species, loss of biodiversity, ocean acidification and things like that. And so it's warming that's driving those things. So we need to pay attention to how we slow warming. And the New Liberals will be looking at policies that examine industrial agriculture, for example, perhaps to reduce the amount of beef and dairy we produce, not entirely, but to reduce that. And also perhaps even to look at geoengineering projects such as sun reflection that can actually buy us time to get to the kind of levels of emissions zero that we need.
Right, thank you so much for sharing your prospectus there. And we're on to our final question now as we wind up the discussion. The New Liberal Party also has a strong stance on refugees seeking solace in Australia, and unfortunately this issue is pulsing again, and with the recent developments of terrorism in Afghanistan. Do the New Liberals support the actions of the Morrison government in offering refugee visas to Afghan athletes, and could they be doing more for those Australian permanent residents and citizens who are stuck in Afghanistan, please?
Yes, we believe we can do more, but we can only do more if we first look at the situation through a humanitarian lens rather than a security lens. We have to remember that a nation like Australia was built on immigration, and our productivity in Australia is tied to immigration. And so it's absolutely critical, not just from an economic point of view, but also from a humanitarian point, that we do as much as we can for refugees, not just in Afghanistan, but wherever they are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights again. That's actually all the time we have for in today's time slot. Was there anything you'd like to share with the viewers before we close up the discussion?
Just think very carefully about how you vote leading up to the next election. I mean, we're in trouble, we're in dire straits, and I believe the New Liberals is a socially progressive party, but economically responsible as well. So look carefully to how you vote.
Thank you, and every vote does count, and best of luck with your near-term pipeline goals and the party's future in general.
Thank you so much.
And viewers, if you've just joined us, we just had a very interesting discussion with Dr. Richard Haines, a Senior Policy Advisor for the New Liberals, a newly registered Australian political party. And if you'd like to watch the full discussion, please head to our YouTube channel, 𝐊𝐴LKINE Media, where you will find it there. And please stay watching for more expert talks and live market commentaries. And as we say, stay apprised and invest wise with 𝐊𝐴LKINE.